I am going to get this meeting started. So I thank you everyone for coming in and being interested in the Grand Avenue redesign and what the city is proposing and some questions we have for you, the residents of the area, about some location options along Grand Avenue that we want to get your feedback on tonight and over the next couple of months. But again, thank you for coming out tonight. My name is Joe Whiting. I am the project manager of the concept designing process and planning engagement for the Grand Avenue redesign. And then tonight we will first we'll kind of go over a little bit of background information, just kind of refresh everyone's memory. We'll kind of go into a little context about what kind of led into some of these drawings you'll see at the end of it, and then we'll go into those. Finally, we'll go into those drawings and those location options, and then before the end, we'll kind of give a little more preview about kind of the schedule moving forward from today as well, and what we're looking at until we get to construction in 2024. But with that, I am going to get right into this, and then at the end of this, we'll have a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, feel free to hold those until the end, and then feel free to use one of the hand reactions up on the top of the screen here, and you can I'll call on you, and you can ask your question. We can have a little feedback, a little discussion. All right. Does this work? Okay. All right, so the basics of the project itself. So the project is Grand Avenue from Fairview Avenue to, one person here. A project is from Fairview Avenue to Snelling Avenue, and it's going to be a full reconstruction, which includes a complete removal of all the right-of-way and putting it all back in, including underground utilities, sidewalks, curb and gutters, landscaping area, street. All that will be removed and put back in again, brand new in our reconstruction process. An update from our previous open house, which took place a couple months ago. The city applied for funding from MnDOT to also get the Snelling Avenue intersection signal replacement and some geometric changes for safety features at Snelling Avenue. MnDOT did award the city with those funds, and so that is also now going to be part of this project as well. The specific look of Snelling Avenue and potentially what that could look like is going to be something that we'll be working directly with MnDOT in over the next couple months, and so we don't have anything to show for that today. However, in a few months when we come to the final preferred concept design for Grand Avenue, we will have Snelling Avenue in there, and so once that's ready to go, we can include that into our drawings and let everyone get some feedback on what they think of the potentially reconfigured Snelling Avenue intersection with Grand Avenue as well. Real quick, back to the basics again. So just want to retouch on some of the project needs and goals for why we are doing this project at this part of Grand Avenue. So the project need is really one of the bigger drivers is the low pavement quality throughout the project extent. So part of this project goes through Mcallister College, and part of the street roadway over there was failing a few years ago, and so we did a kind of a quick fix on some parts of this section here because of the failing state of the roadway. And so we're kind of coming back now as do reconstruction, do more permanent fix of some of this roadway that is very poor throughout the project extent. Another big driver of this project is very high pedestrian activity and pedestrian safety, specifically through the corridor. And looking at Mcallister College, we'll kind of see some of these numbers, but some of this pedestrian activity through Mcallister College is very high, much higher than a lot of other areas of the city. And so that's a big driver of why we're looking at this part of Grand Avenue to start our reconstruction process for the street. Also, of course, there's aging underground infrastructure. So a lot of the infrastructure, water pipes, sewer pipes, anything, any electric wires, any fiber, anything like underground, a lot of that's really aging, and it is really time for the city to come in and replace a lot of that. Specifically, water and sewer pipes have been there potentially for 50, 60, 70 years at this point, and so it's time to for the city to come through and start replacing and repairing this underground infrastructure. Some of the project goals from this project we're really looking to get out of this. We're really looking to improve safety along the corridor. Grand Avenue, we did a safety study with MnDOT about 6 years ago at this point. But Grand Avenue is one of those corridors in the city that is really identified for infrastructure improvements to improve safety along the corridor, and that's a big driver of what we're doing here today. Upgrade and modernize that aging infrastructure below ground again. So it's getting there. They're very old infrastructure, so it's coming through and upgrading and modernizing that infrastructure. We're looking to really also improve the built environment to better serve Grand Avenue businesses. Going through this process, data collection, there's a lot of obvious issues that come through, especially with with fitting everything on the sidewalk areas today, especially for those business with patios and product display and things like that on Grand Avenue. And so really want to better improve the environment to really serve our businesses and serve our community. Improve the transit user experience and general access for the corridor. Really through this project, we can also make it easier to walk, bike, roll, use transit to get through this corridor, and make it a better place to want to be and spend time. Encourage non-automotive trips along and to the corridor to help meet broader city goals. So through our pedestrian plan, our comprehensive plan, our climate action resilience plan, we've got a lot of goals that really look to create a much more multimodal St. Paul and getting people to and from businesses, from school, from work, to and from home, with encouraging those non-automotive trips. And so this is one of the big aspects of this project as well. And finally, as we talk about Mcallister campus specifically, we're really looking to improve the interaction and that placemaking idea of through Mcallister's campus and really help Grand Avenue become part of campus rather than being a barrier as many students and people perceive it as today on campus. Little project background here. So now kind of moving to some of what we've done so far to get to this point. So our phase 1 engagement really ran from about March to July of this year. Really included multiple meetings with corridor stakeholders, including Mcallister College, many meetings with Mcallister College, Hidden River Junior High, right there on Cambridge Street, Metro Transit, MnDOT, area businesses. I've met with many area businesses also through this process as well, including we also held our first open house, which was in June, which had members from the public attend, similar to today. We've also done online surveys, and we've got interactive mapping tools we had in this first phase, and those surveys seen about 260 responses to our general survey, which is kind of getting more general ideas that people use and want to use Grand Avenue and what they want to see for a future Grand Avenue. We got 60 Mcallister students specifically responding to a survey about specifically the crossings of Mcallister. We got about 150 interactive mapping tool responses, and so those were really letting residents drop pins on a map and kind of say exactly what the issue was or what they liked about a certain aspect of the corridor in a certain location. All in all, through all these activities, in person, online, virtually, small meetings, large meetings, we got over 500 members of the public to engage through this initial phase of the process, and really did help drive kind of what some of these what the look of the concept plan that you'll see in a little bit here it is coming to. Some key points of what we've heard so far from all these different people and all this different kinds of engagement we've done. Really, overall, one of the big things we hear a lot through this process is the idea of vehicle speeds are just far too high through the corridor. Many people trying to cross the street, trying to walk the street, just really have expressed considerable idea that vehicles tend to speed through Grand Avenue. It's a pretty wide and straight street today, so that does make sense, and that's as with the pandemic has kind of got people driving faster, driving a little more crazy. It certainly is not. It's certainly evident as well in St. Paul and Grand Avenue. Another idea I've seen again connected to that vehicle speed is the road width is really wider than is really necessary to accommodate the existing vehicle needs on the corridor, and we'll see what that looks like in a little bit here. A lot of responses, the idea of sidewalk width is inadequate, again, especially for those businesses with patio seating or do product displays or other events kind of in front of their business or on the side of their business. Just really not a whole lot of room there to do that. And so that was one of the bigger issues we've heard. Many people have said crossing really at any intersection as a pedestrian doesn't really feel that safe, kind of tied to that vehicle speeds, maybe that lack of sidewalk width, kind of connect that as well. Another big one we've heard citywide, is we heard it loud and clear, is that tree impacts and survivability of trees along the corridor is a big concern. This part of the corridor actually recently, I'm sure everyone knows, has had its ash trees lost to emerald ash borer a few years ago, and so part of this corridor are pretty bare looking. So that's something really we're cognizant of as we move forward, is to encourage better tree canopy growth and health of those trees. And finally, business impacts, need to be mitigated as much as possible during construction, and we really need to, if we're looking to support our business through our designs, we really need to help them also through that construction process as well. Mcallister campus specifically, we heard the current crossing situation for students is not ideal, as it can be confusing for both pedestrians and motorists. As you got kind of those mid-block crossings, it's some people will yield, some vehicles won't yield, some pedestrians will just kind of go out there, some won't go out there. So it's just kind of not a very clear situation, and that leads to some issues and trouble there. And also those mid-block crossings lack any accessibility features, so there's no curb ramps, there's nothing there for if you're in a wheelchair or any other modes of movement. You can't really use those mid-block crossings at all. However, on the other side of the Mcallister campus, the existing median we've heard works really well on both aesthetically. It looks good, and it also does seem to have some sort of impact on lowering vehicle speeds through the corridor. That could also be the pedestrian activity as well connected to that. But there is some positive benefits that we see from this median that exists today on Mcallister's campus. We've also heard specifically to Hidden River Junior High, Cambridge Street crossing. The Cambridge Street crossing sees inadequate. It's really inadequate today for student crossing. It's kind of a faded sign and some faded paint, typical kind of intersection on Grand Avenue. But we've got a lot of middle school students here, so smaller kids kind of crossing the street getting to and from school, and so vehicle yielding really is seen as a problem. I went out there and did an observation one morning just to see how that kind of worked out, drop off and kids getting there and everything. Definitely does seem to be there's some issue with vehicle yielding, especially when we're talking with small children. That is as a pretty important issue that we're really looking to zero in on here as well. And speaking of that kind of observation of the pickup time, drop-off time, there can be long vehicle queuing that also gets onto Grand Avenue and kind of creates kind of a chaotic environment, both as we drop kids off and pick them up, and also kind of creates some unsafe driving behavior, which then impacts children trying to cross Grand Avenue. The pickup and drop-off issue is actually being also worked on by Hidden River Junior High. They're going through a large remodeling process, and part of that will also include kind of rethinking about the pickup and drop-off time. So that'll also, I think, lead into what we do here as well on Grand Avenue. I just want to really talk about some key takeaways that we heard from some of these surveys. So again, that general survey and that student survey, but you see on the right here, we got a couple of survey response examples here, question 3, question 4. But really some key takeaways are the majority of respondents, of those about 260 respondents, currently drive to, across, or along the corridor at 55%. However, a majority of those same respondents would rather walk, bike, take transit, just some other means to get there rather than driving. And so that's a big thing that says, Grand Avenue today maybe isn't so encouraging to users to bike or walk. And so there's some strategies we can to help encourage those other uses that are clearly people want to do that, but just aren't currently doing that. Safety and pedestrian comfort were the top 2 most cited limiting factors for the use or enjoyment of the corridor, which kind of ties into that idea of, most people driving, but most people not wanting to drive. So they're just probably not driving because they don't feel safe or comfortable not driving on the corridor. Again, tied to that, safety again and pedestrian use were the 2 top categories respondents wanted to see be addressed with this project. So there's a list of about 10 different ideas through the project which could be addressed that we asked respondents, and safety and pedestrian use were by far the 2 highest items that were wished to be addressed for this project. And so again, another big kind of idea that was going through into this concept design. And then finally, the Mcallister student survey. So Mcallister students really indicated that Grand Avenue is a barrier to them on campus, and that yielding and speeding are both 2 of their concerns crossing Grand Avenue today. But on some of the data we collected too, so through this process, we collected a ton of different data. We collected pedestrian count data through campus all the way down to Fairview. We collected parking data, we collected crash data, and we analyzed that. And it's all in a detailed engagement report on our website. So if you haven't seen that and you want to take some time to read that, it's on our website. It's a pretty long report though. So if you don't got all day, I won't blame you. But so we're just going to touch some key points here. But if the full report is on our website as well. But as you can see here in Mcallister College, we got these the 3 mid-block crossings here. We saw a very, very, very high pedestrian activity through this section of Grand, and I lost my presentation. Jeanette, do you see my presentation still?
No.
No.
We are not seeing your PowerPoint.
Okay, that just turned off on me. 1 second, sorry about that. Technical difficulties here. I'm gonna just share my screen. We see that.
Yeah, we're seeing it now.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. The PowerPoint live just kind of stopped, so I don't think I'm gonna do that again. At least not tonight. So let's go through this. That's okay.
So yeah, maybe just start the slideshow. Yeah.
You see that? No.
Yeah, we're seeing it, but it's still just the PowerPoint. It's not a presentation mode, but I think it's fine.
Yeah, we should see it.
There we go. Now we're good.
Okay. Sorry about that. Moving on. Where were we? Okay, so where were we? So pedestrian traffic across Grand Avenue. Today, so we went out there during a kind of a typical day on campus last April before classes got out. So this is kind of a typical day of pedestrian traffic across Grand Avenue through the campus. You see here, volumes are very, very, very high. These volumes we don't see really anywhere else in the city and any of the crosswalks in the city. So this is a very important data tool to use for us here to kind of figure out, what kind of is actually happening out here. Seem to be quite a lot of crossings here, so these mid-block crossings are very well used, and so as we move forward, we really need to see how to incorporate this into our design of Grand Avenue. But pedestrian activity is highest at Mcallister College, and kind of as you move away from it, so you move west towards Fairview, pedestrian activity kind of drops pretty quickly as you go down west from there. However, Hidden River Junior High does drive high volumes of pedestrians across Grand Avenue, with about 405 crossings in a typical school day. In a peak crossing hour, seen nearly 100 crossings at 3 p.m., about 88. A lot of those were junior high students letting out from school. And then again, that full data can be found on our project website. And just really quick, just showing some of these other volumes that we took for the rest of the corridor here. As you can see, again, Cambridge, 405 crossings in that west leg, so that leg that students go to get to and from school, 8 in that peak hour. Snelling and Mcallister Street also saw pretty significant crossing numbers as well. So you can see here on Snelling Avenue, we had over 500 crossings at every single crossing point on the intersection, with a peak on the south leg. So that's where the A-line stations are. About 805 crossings at peak hour of nearly 100 crossings in an hour. So significant pedestrian activity on Snelling, and also on Mcallister as well. Likely, some spillover from Mcallister College, but again, all those crossing legs out, more than 500 crossings on each leg, and with the peak at about 730, that north leg, which is crossing on the north side of Grand there. Fairview, significantly less activity, pedestrian activity, makes sense as you're further away from those activity centers. However, we did see some activity, especially people going to and from the theater, going to CVS, and those kind of small businesses there. You did see some consistent kind of pedestrian activity through here. That is something to note. We also did parking data through the corridor. So we really went out from early May to early June and did about 10 to 12 different counts and looked at both Grand Avenue itself and also the intersecting corridors that intersect it and have parking available as well to the public. Took counts in the morning, afternoon, and the evening to kind of get a broad idea of, if there's any peaks or valleys of when those parking is more or less utilized. And we really saw that Grand Avenue has higher peaks in the afternoon and evening occupancy than the corridor as a whole when including those cross streets. So Grand Avenue itself has seen a lot more parking activity, which I think makes sense. You've got the businesses, you've got people actually destinations to go there. So I think that kind of fits with what we're thinking here as for parking wise. Peaks in the afternoon time frame at about 45% average for the corridor as a whole, and about 60% for Grand Avenue itself. So as you can see, those peaks in Grand are much higher than if you include those cross streets. However, even on Grand Avenue, there is quite a bit of disparity between where the parking is heaviest and where it's lightest. So parking utilization is highest between Mcallister Street and Cambridge Street, which is where a lot of those businesses are that we all like to attend. Patagonia, those kind of businesses there. So you see 83% in the afternoon and 78% in the evening usage of that block specifically. Kind of as you move west, again, similar to pedestrian traffic, it kind of drops pretty precipitously as you get closer to Fairview. But again, so close in that one block, we've got nearly a full use of that parking, which I think if anyone's tried to park there, they're well aware of that. We also, just for reference, we also went through the corridor and kind of took ideas of how many spaces are both on the street and off street through this corridor. And you see on Grand Avenue itself, for the 4 blocks, you got about 134 legal parking spaces. On the cross streets, just a similar amount, about 132 legal parking spaces. And off street, we counted about 350 or so parking spaces for private use. So that's all private parking. That's not city parking. First, also, we took a pretty detailed crash study. So we took data for the last decade through the project corridor using MnDOT's MNCMAT2 archive. So that takes all police reports. So any crash that got a police report essentially is put in this database and visualized spatially, and we can then make graphics like this to kind of figure out where the hotspots for crashes are. Total incidents in the last 10 years, about 151 crashes from Snelling to Fairview. 8% of those crashes involve pedestrians or bicyclists. However, most of the injury crashes involve pedestrian bicyclists. Snelling Avenue, obviously, I think, with the most traffic, saw the most incidents at about 60 crashes over the last 10 years. One incident on Fairview Avenue did result in a fatality in 2015. So that's, again, some more data points that we really should be cognizant of as we're moving towards zero deaths on a roadway. Any deaths that we see in any project corridors, we really looking to address the issues that cause those deaths. Again, as the 6 crashes resulted in injuries, with 4 of those being pedestrians on the corridor. So most injuries were pedestrians, while very few of the crashes were pedestrians. This graphic here just kind of shows where these incidents took place. So there was the 12 pedestrian and cyclist crashes through the corridor. So 9 pedestrian street cyclists. You can see here it's kind of distributed pretty evenly throughout the corridor. We might have a little we got a little node right there. We see more incidents on Cambridge and Fairview, but pretty consistent throughout the corridor on incidents with pedestrians. And then injury crashes, again, 2 motorists and 5 pedestrians, including that one fatal crash at Fairview. Kind of gives you an idea. So 2 of those injury crashes were near Cambridge, and the 2 injury vehicle crashes were up on Snelling Avenue, where kind of vehicle speeds are much higher. So that's kind of the idea of the crash study here, just getting us an idea of where these crashes are concentrated and where we should really be focusing our safety investments as we move forward with reconstruction. You see here Fairview, Cambridge, and Snelling, again, come out as crash hotspots as well, where most of the incidents were taking place. I would like to note one thing here on the Mcallister campus, so between Mcallister and Snelling. So we've got those 5,000 students crossing every day, and we've got about 7,000 vehicles every day driving through. Yet we didn't see a single pedestrian crash in the last decade through this part of the corridor. So it's just an interesting note with those high volumes of vehicles and pedestrians that there actually hasn't been a single incident that injured or was involved a pedestrian through that part of the corridor. With all the data kind of thrown out there, so I'm now going to jump into the concept design and some of these location options that we are looking for feedback on from our attendees today and from any residents or anyone who actually uses Grand Avenue as a corridor. So real quick, so this is the overall concept design here. As you can see here, more in-depth images, you can go on our website and kind of zoom in and look at some of these specifics of any of these locations or any of these options. Today we'll kind of go over a general overview. In the question and answer session, I can kind of pull up more specific, closer zoom-ins. But for right now, so really the curb-to-curb width is going to be narrowed from 56 feet to 48 feet. So that will result in a 4-foot roadway reduction of the width, and that 8 foot and 4 foot on both sides. So that 4 feet will be able to be returned to boulevard and pedestrian space on the corners, on the edges. So that, again, that total non-vehicle space will be widened from 24 feet to 32 feet. One important note here is we can do all that. We can narrow that roadway that much, and we actually are not changing at all the operations of the street. The left turn lanes will remain, the same through lanes will remain, and the same parking lanes will remain. It's just that much excess space in the roadway today that we can kind of narrow that and still kind of fit our own modern standards of roadway widths for certain uses. Another overall concept design of the corridor is bump outs are going to be installed at all non-signalized intersections, narrowing the crossing distance from 56 feet previously to 36 feet in the crossing areas. So that would be Wheeler Street, potentially Cambridge Street, and then Mcallister Street as well. And here's just another image of a cross section here to kind of give you a different idea of what this will look like. So on the left here, we've got existing typical cross section, which includes 13-foot travel lanes, 10-foot median center turn lane, 10-foot parking lanes, roughly. So there's not a whole lot of paint on the street today, so these are approximations, but that gives you an idea of the width of that. And then our typical concept cross section, we'll narrow those travel lanes to 11 feet, narrow that parking lane to 8 feet, and keep that median turn lane at 10 feet. And really this shows that this all still can fit and actually not really change the operation of the street at all. What that does mean is we'll be able to get some additional boulevard space. Again, looking at kind of tree health and tree survivability, the more space they have to collect water, to not be covered by asphalt and concrete, the more healthy and the more vibrant they'll be. So in those residential areas, we're looking at a potential 10-foot buffer, which will include all that green space and also keep a 6-foot walk. In the commercial areas, so in front of the businesses, that grass buffer space will turn then more to more sidewalks, so then it'll increase your patio width potentially if you have outdoor seating, or your product display area will increase by 4 feet in front of your business. So considerably more room to operate for those who are walking or using the street for anything other than driving a car, and also keeping, again, that kind of basic operations for vehicles the same. Although, so one of the first options we have here is potentially looking at potential medians at some of the areas on Grand Avenue that currently today don't really have much use for that center median space. So there are areas where there's no driveways, where there's no left turning really going on mid-block. And so today it's just kind of empty asphalt. So these potential looking at options that would include a median, either landscaped or hardscape. So hardscape would just essentially be a concrete curb with potentially lighting fixtures in the middle there. So you get better lighting throughout the corridor. However, you wouldn't get a whole lot those aesthetic or green improvements with the hardscape. With the median, with the landscape median, so that really would that widen that center area from 10 feet to 11 feet just because of necessary maintenance requirements from the city, which would narrow our boulevards to 9 feet. And also, again, increase maintenance requirements, would increase, potentially needing to clear that green space, to keep that green space trimmed, to keep those trees alive and planted and things like that. So the landscape median definitely has some trade-offs with the other ones. Hardscape would fit within that existing turn lane that we've got that 10 feet. So you keep your 10-foot boulevards on the side, and you'd have significantly reduced maintenance requirements for a hardscape median. And then, of course, the no median option, which is essentially what we have today. Again, we still have that narrow cross section. However, we keep that 10-foot boulevard, and we would essentially keep the roadway looking the same as it is today with that kind of center median area. Even where there's not turning taking place, you'd still have that asphalt median area. So really 3 options looking at here potentially for Grand Avenue for the median area. And then I just want to note the business area here would not see a median installed just because we've got significant left turning needs for mid-block area, whether it be alleyways, driveways. We'll also have some loading and unloading going on in some of these businesses in that middle area. So just not recommended to continue with the median in some of those areas that need that median space, but in areas that really, again, that median space isn't being used, there's potentially some other options we can look at for putting something else there. So just to show you again a cross section of what this could look like. So on the left here, you've got what the concept would look like, no median. So again, we got that center turn lane, which is empty potentially, but just asphalt. And then with the trees, with the center median here as a landscape median, it would look like that, right? We'd have some green space in the middle. We lose a little bit of the boulevard on each side, but again, that'd be made up by additional green space in the middle there. So just some trade-offs to consider. Our first kind of intersection options here would be Fairview Avenue. So Fairview Avenue is one of the streets that we have seen higher in pedestrian injury and the one fatality in the corridor. So really 2 options here are just looking at if we want to kind of keep the same design as is today with that narrowed cross section, so room for cars to take rights and get out of traffic, to take rights onto Fairview Avenue and to ease that kind of traffic burden, or to again kind of install these ideas, these curb extensions, bump outs to bring those crossing points much more narrow, which would obviously increase pedestrian safety, but would also have potentially some bus stop impacts. So the bus stops, because our bump out would need to be tapered back into the curb in the mid-block section, we would have to move those bus stops mid-block, further mid-block, about 18 feet from where they are today. That potentially could see a parking spot or 2 lost at this intersection if the bus station needs to move far enough. Not significant parking losses, but there would be potentially a spot or 2 that would be lost if we did put the bump outs in. However, again, we're reducing that crossing distance from 48 feet to 36 feet, so significantly safer for pedestrians to get across. And so, yes, just the trade-offs there. First multi-option area here. So going back to Cambridge Street, so we've got Hidden River Junior High here. And again, we got pretty significant middle schoolers, junior high students kind of going to and from class here in the mornings and evenings, and looking at potentially ways to increase the safety here as is. So I'll say option one is really kind of that default installing bump outs or curb extensions at all of our non-signalized intersections. So that again would be their standard 6-foot bump outs, would reduce crossing distance again from 48 feet to 36 feet. There would be no intersection operation impacts. Really, you'd still be able to take lefts onto Cambridge. You'd still be go through on Cambridge as well. There would be, again, some minor bus stop impacts. We might have to move those bus stops about 18 feet or so. Mid-block, again, we might lose a spot or two if those bus station impacts, but again, not significant at all. Option two would act, instead of seeing a full 6-foot bump outs at each intersection quadrant, there would be a partial center median installed on the side where students cross, on that west side of the intersection. And so what that would do is really kind of give students a 2-stage crossing, so they can cross one direction of traffic, stop, then cross one direction of traffic, and keep going. This kind of design increases safety significantly, just because, again, you've got a kind of a refuge island as a pedestrian to stop and reassess your situation and then try and cross again. It also, by again having that median there is some traffic calming effects for drivers as they kind of come to a median. They generally are going to drive a little more cautious because that really does signal something is going on there. Operation impacts, so you would see the left turning. So from a driver moving eastbound going north onto Cambridge, that left turn lane would be removed. There's not significant left turning going on here. Cambridge kind of NT intersections at Summit, just a block north here. So unless you're going to the school or one of these, potentially one of these area parking lots on the north side here, not a whole lot of left turning activity going on here. But there would be left turning impacts on option two going northbound. Option three would be kind of the biggest change to the intersection here. This would see a full intersection median installed, which would kind of come over the entire intersection. And essentially what it do is it would stop through movement for motor vehicles on Cambridge and force them to take a right at the intersection, while allowing bicycles to permeate through the middle and continue on in their through traffic. So Cambridge Street is a bicycle boulevard on our bike network, and so this is kind of a typical bicycle boulevard treatment on some major intersections that you see in Minneapolis and some areas in St. Paul as well. But again, this would have the similar safety improvements of the partial median, but just for both sides of the street. So you have a 13-foot crossing, a 19-foot crossing. So again, 2-stage crossing. Operation impacts, so you would now have no left turn really allowed going southbound or northbound through here because of the median kind of in the way there. And then you also would have no vehicle through movements on Cambridge. So again, you'd have some significant vehicle impacts. You'd force right turning here. Again, and those bike boulevard improvements, though, would be through this third option. Again, kind of trade-offs here as we're looking to improve the safety of this corridor. However, all these options are going to be significantly safer than what is there today. And just, again, a cross-section kind of showing what this would look like at the intersection. So we have with just the bump outs here, again, we got the through lane and the right lane, both 13 feet through there, and then your 10-foot median for a 36-foot curb to curb. And then if you have the median in here, then you'd have these the travel lanes again cut in half. You have a refuge island to cross at 2 stages and move through the intersection that way. Now moving on to our final concept location options, that's Mcallister College. So as we saw earlier, Mcallister College is significant pedestrian activity moving through here. But also, as we saw, Mcallister College also through the section hasn't really seen any real major safety issues, at least through the crash data that we have. So the crash data doesn't record near misses or incidents that weren't reported to the police. So there is kind of a blind spot there. However, the data does seem to show that no one has really been injured through this section, through the section of Grand Avenue. And so option one is kind of the leave it as is with necessary improvements option. So the crossings would remain as is. The kind of situation that exists today would remain as is. However, where pedestrians yield the vehicles mid-block. However, ADA improvements would be made at each point. So any pedestrian could now cross these points. So there would be curb ramps. There would be, they're called truncated domes. Those are for people with visibility issues, so they know to come into a street. Those kind of required ADA improvements would be made on these crossings. However, operationally, they would remain as they are today. That's option one. Option two is kind of responding to a CIB request. So CIB is a process where residents of the city can kind of petition the city to make improvements wherever in the city, and they can give ideas about what the city could do. So this option 2 is kind of responding to that request in a way. So this would see that in western crossing point. So we've got the dorms just to the north and the church just to the south here. That western crossing point, which actually sees the most pedestrian activity, that would be the one we'd expand and we'd formalize. So that one, that crossing would then now be vehicles would be required to yield to pedestrians. There would be stop sign, there would be pedestrian crossing signs, there would be bars on the ground to indicate where cars should stop, and cars would legally be obligated to yield to pedestrians at that crossing. The other 2 crossings would remain the same, again with those necessary ADA improvements and also considered to marking those crossings, but the operations of those 2 would remain as is. Option 3 would see those 2 outer crossings, so those 2 kind of heaviest pedestrian use crossings be widened and improved. Again, would have the obligations shifted to vehicles to yield to pedestrians at those 2 crossings rather than and pedestrians yield to vehicles. But with those 2 crossings being widened and formalized, that center crossing would be closed and removed. So we'd essentially consolidate all our pedestrian crossings. So those 2 crossings that are now there, and that middle crossing would no longer be there. Again, and then ADA improvements would be made at each crossing point to help those help everyone cross the street. Option 4 would see those 2 outer crossings, so that eastern and western crossings, those would be closed. And then all those crossings would be consolidated to kind of a large scale centerpiece crossing in the middle of the block. So this would include stop bars, markings, and potentially or likely some sort of traffic signal to give pedestrians right away and kind of give more of a formalized look to that intersection here. So because of the pedestrian volumes, if we didn't have a signal or something here, we probably, cars would have to stop all day long during class. So this would likely need some sort of signal upgrade here as well. We're also looking here to potentially look at this crossing as a raised crossing. I'll show you kind of a cross section of what that looks like, but essentially where the pedestrians cross would be raised up to the curb line, and the street would then have to go up into the pedestrian area. This is a kind of a design that really fosters more yielding because vehicles must slow down, essentially like a little speed bump there in the road. So once vehicles are already slowing down, they're more likely to yield pedestrians. And also then it raises pedestrians up as they cross the street. So they're higher up, they're no longer going down the street. So that, again, for those with disabilities or anyone who's crossing the street who maybe isn't as visible down on the street, once you're raised up, you're a little more visible. Again, yielding and safety improvements are included there. Again, those east and west crossings would be closed. And any of these designs that show crossings closed, we would be working with Mcallister College to potentially make it so you couldn't cross at other parts of the block. We would really, if we're going to close a crossing, we're going to close it and make sure that pedestrians must be funneled to a crossing that we have open and formalized. Finally, the 5th option would kind of be the biggest change. So this would be a tabled crossing. So essentially option 3, where we have those 2 crossing points widened and formalized with signage and again requiring vehicles to yield to pedestrians. However, the whole section between the east and west crossing point would be raised up and be considered a tabled crossing. So again, that would be the idea of the roadway going up to pedestrians area, and the pedestrian being higher up. Cars must go up into the pedestrian area rather than pedestrians going down the vehicle area. And this one also would see the center crossing moved. And a cross section of that looks something like this. So we see a typical crossing where we wouldn't have a raised crossing. Again, vehicles are down kind of lower and pedestrians go down and they go back up. And then if a raised or table crossing, again, would see that kind of that crossing area be flush for pedestrians so they can kind of move through without having to go down into the roadway. So those are 5 options for Mcallister. Those are all the options for the different areas. I just real quick before I open it up to some Q&A, just some upcoming also potential events that you might be interested in. So today's public open house. Saturday or next Monday, we'll be going to the St. Paul Planning Commission to talk to the Transportation Committee there about these same options. We'll be going to Mcallister College for a little open house event there as well on Tuesday next week. And then there's a Mcallister Groveland Business Roundtable. So any business people here today. So that is coming up on the 18th, where we get a little more one-on-one time potentially to talk about business needs through the corridor and how these concepts do or do not help them. Again, run real quick through the project timeline. So we're kind of moving now through phase 2. which really kicked off in September and will run through November, which will lead us to, once we collect all this feedback and data throughout the second phase of the design of the process, then we'll move to formulate a preferred alternative, and include internal discussions about needs and requirements from our own city staff and other agencies. And then once we get that preferred alternative, we'll come back with more of an unveiling of that preferred alternative, and then we're moving forward to getting feedback on that preferred alternative before moving into construction design in 23 and 24 when the project will be constructed in 2024 construction season. So with that, I will open it up to questions. I'll also say if you want to give feedback online, we do have a survey online with, again, more detailed drawings, easier to zoom in and kind of get an idea of what those widths of lane widths and certain things like that would be through that on our project website. It's kind of big blown up there. Or you can anytime reach out to me, email, or phone call. I think my phone number is on the website as well. So if you want to give me a phone call, email, you can certainly do that at any time. But with that, I'd like to open it up to any questions or feedback from anyone. And Jeanette, I think you're gonna have to help me out on that because I can no longer see if people raise their hands.
Okay, and we do have one in the chat too, so
Okay.
I'll just start there. Can you clarify the Cambridge Street north from Grand to Summit? Did you say one option would be no car traffic, only bikes, or did I misunderstand?
Good question. So that's a very good question. So the options for Cambridge wouldn't see vehicles being outlawed from Cambridge north of Grand. It would just be potentially option 3. If you're coming from south of Grand, you wouldn't be able to continue north through the intersection. So you would still be able to take a right turn onto Cambridge for that block, and then go through up to Summit with that option 3. Option 2 and option 1, you'd still be able to make it through, and it'd be completely open, and there'd be no really issues with getting through. It just option 3 would potentially see that through movement from the south of Grand to the north of Grand, kind of cut off and forcing you to take a right. But you could still use Cambridge as it is today. It's just it would be not as direct a connection.
Great, we got a thanks on that. And then Kate, if you want to ask your question.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
My question is, I travel this area every day. One of the concerns I have, and I have reviewed these and I have given feedback online for you. Whenever you're driving, and I'm usually headed, I guess, west. Anyhow, when I'm driving, oftentimes because of kids getting out of classes and everything, it's not like you have 1 or 2, you might have 20 that are crossing, even though it says not for crossing. They still cross there. It's kids. You're not going to change that. But you can end up with your car sitting in the intersection of Snelling Avenue and Grand. It's a very uncomfortable position to be in because you had the green light, now it's turning yellow, and you're still sitting there because the person is waiting for these kids to cross. So I'm never in favor. I know it's inconvenient for these kids to go down to Mcallister, but it's also inconvenient, and I think a hazard for drivers to be sitting in the intersection when the light's turning.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah, that's a very valid, point about potentially vehicles queuing into Snelling Avenue and the kind of danger that could present. And so that's definitely why, as we kind of move forward here, looking through this, I think looking to potentially consolidate crossing points, I think would help that a lot. I think potentially, one of those crossing points that is probably the most problematic, I think, for queuing into Snelling would be this eastern one, again, because you don't have a lot of room there from that crossing point to Snelling, and so that is certainly something that we're analyzing. We're working closely with traffic to kind of, again, nail down, how many crossings and really what these crossings are going to look like and how they're going to function. And so I think the difference is what it is today is, again, it's pretty informal, right? Again, kids cross, they don't cross, some vehicles yield, some vehicles don't yield, and that kind of does lead to unexpected or unintended consequences of potentially vehicles queuing into the intersection. But through this design process, we'll be working closely with our traffic department to ensure that whatever we do put on this through this block here, that we're going to minimize that. I can't say that'll always be there'll never be queuing into Snelling Avenue ever again, but this process really does allow us to kind of take a little more kind of understanding about what the operations actually are looking like out there, and to actually propose something that actually I think works for both for the pedestrians and for vehicles. I do think because of just the volumes we see here and because of the way Grand Avenue cuts directly through campus, I think there's going to be some crossing point through this through campus here. It's just again how many and where that's going to be, I think, is going to be the question we answer through this process. And I will say the 5 options we show here, we got to show some options, and so these are the 5 options that kind of came out. However, the final preferred concept design might not even be one of these options. It could be a mix of 1 or 2, or there could be maybe something that comes out of this process we're doing right now, where an idea comes out that maybe we didn't think of it at first, and it really does work with Mcallister's needs and with vehicles needs and with the city's needs. And so I do hear that and I understand that, and I just want to let you know that this part of the process is where we're really going to be analyzing that and making sure that we can minimize that as much as possible. And I appreciate your comment.
Great, we have another hand raised, and I'm sorry, you're just in there as Healing Insight. And I'm assuming you're asking the same as your chat, so I won't read that.
I actually have a separate comment, but yes, this is Senya, and I'm both a business owner on Grand Avenue and a resident as well. So I walk, bike, and drive this area very frequently. And I actually wanted to second what Kate had to say about turning from Snelling onto Grand Avenue and that first crosswalk for the Mcallister College students. So I feel like with option 3 and 5, where that would be a formalized intersection, I think that's going to create, I would like it to be explored what sort of traffic backups that's going to cause on Snelling Avenue as a result of that. So that was
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I thought you were finished.
That was my first question, so I'll stop talking.
Okay, yeah, and I think I'll as we move through this process, as we work through this, so this majority of this project is funded through MSA funding, which is Minnesota Municipal State Aid, which comes from MnDOT, and because of Snelling Avenue right here, which is a MnDOT state highway, we'll be working very closely with MnDOT, and they will certainly let us know if what we're proposing doesn't work for their state highway needs. And so I think, that we will, the analysis of kind of how traffic works through this area will really kick off when we kind of get an idea of what that preferred design will look like. And so I do appreciate the comments. That's very good points, and it's definitely going to be part of our analysis.
Wonderful. And would bridges be an option for the Mcallister College students?
So that's an interesting question. We've had kind of the idea of bridges or tunnels floated in the past. I'd say first thing would be that it'd be pretty cost prohibitive. It would be very expensive to construct a pedestrian bridge just for this, against a pretty narrow Grand Avenue. And I think if I remember correctly, I do believe some conversation with Mcallister, because we looked at potentially what a pedestrian bridge could look like, and requiring those grades because they would need to be accessible to people with disabilities, and that required a certain grade. Those grades would be pushing the bridge kind of abutments halfway through campus. And so a bridge is not really a realistic option for this through Mcallister's campus, just for those costs and those kind of physical constraints, I think, of the area.
Okay, great. And then to that point, how is this funded, and where will there be assessments for the businesses and the residents along this stretch of Grand?
That's a good question. And so a majority of the project will be funded with MSA funding. So about $7 million right now is put away for that, but there will be some assessments on top of that. I do not have an answer about what those would be at this point. As we kind of move forward in the process throughout 2023, we'll be obviously reaching out more that kind of logistics end of the idea of the project. And then once we kind of get a better idea of that as we move forward with more construction designing and things like that next year, we certainly will be in contact and talking to everyone about potentially what those assessments could look like. I would say there probably will be some. I just don't know exactly what they'll look like yet at this moment.
Okay, thank you.
And then I know we have a question from Scott, and then we'll go back to the other question in the chat. That works.
Yep.
So Scott, if you want to go ahead.
Yep, I think I've got myself unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thanks for doing a more detailed explanation. It was a little bit challenging the first time I went through the deck, and I think I get it now. I had first flush thought was I had a little bit of a concern about the medians and how they affect people exiting their parking on the curb. I drive Grand every day as well, you know, and what I see is a lot of cars and people exiting cars exiting the curb, delivery vehicles double parking. There's a lot of reasons that people are moving into that middle turn lane section from Fairview up to all the way through this entire run. By putting a median in there, are we potentially creating a traffic jam or an unsafe situation for people exiting the curb?
Scott, that's a good point and a good question. So, you know, certainly if there was a median there, so one of these two options, you would have certainly less room to maneuver. I did hear a similar comment actually about bikes at the Mcallister Groveland Transportation Committee meeting earlier this week, and that is a concern I think for bikes, for vehicles, parking vehicles getting out of their spots for unloading and unloading. I would say specifically as you kind of get closer to Cambridge with the median, so the median would cut out quite a distance away. I want to say it's about 150 feet or so, maybe 200 feet from the actual intersection start. So you would be quite a bit of distance from where the median is to the intersection point. However, in that mid block, I think there would potentially be some space issues if you've got vehicles moving in and out, doors opening, vehicles trying to get around each other, cyclists going down Grand Avenue. And so, you know, if we do go with one of these median options, I think that will be something we'll be closely monitoring and working out through that process. But, you know, again, one of the options is just not have that median. So, you know, I think if through this process, if the public doesn't really seem to be that interested in medians, if we've got other potential issues, like as you mentioned, as some of our cyclist community mentioned, then, you know, I think potentially looking at keeping essentially the look of the street the same, except just with those narrow cross sections. So that's kind of why I wanted to have these options out here, to have this kind of discussion, to hear what people have to say about living through that as well. So it's a good comment.
So,
I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's a big wide street, but people tend to use a lot of it, is what I observe every day. The other thing had very specifically to do with the three options at Cambridge where we're located. The options 1 and 2 will be, I sent you this as an email as well, Joe. Options 1 and 2 both do something that is long overdue, which is add more protection for the students crossing right there at the West Cambridge intersection. Option 3, I think, creates some concerns because without a left-hand turn off of Grand, all the traffic that is coming to destinations on Grand from 94 is going to have to basically drive past their destination. And I think it's going to create some, one, distraction, because people will say, oh, hey, you know, I followed MapQuest and I can see where I'm going, but I can't get there. And they'll be essentially distracted while they're coming through one of our most critical intersections. So I don't know if that helps a lot. And the first thing they're going to want to do is U-turn. And I really don't want to encourage U-turns on Grand.
That's a very good observation. And I, you know, as I've been on Grand quite a bit this last couple months, I've noticed people already U-turn, you know, quite a bit already. And so, as you're saying, do we really want to encourage more U-turning? I think that's a good, valid question, a valid point to make there about that third option. And so, I do appreciate that comment.
Yeah, but you know, having gone to places where medians are in place and then realize that, well, Marshall would be an example. If you are not native to the area and aren't aware of where the breaks in the median are, you end up driving past your destination a lot. And I think that for Grand Avenue, inviting people from all over the region to come visit us for the first time, having irregularly open intersections is more than challenging. It actually makes people unhappy. So.
All good points. I appreciate that, Scott.
Thank you.
Great. I'm going to do this question from the chat, and then we'll go back to folks that have their hands raised. So would any of the modifications remove parking from Cambridge or Mcallister streets?
Good question. I appreciate that. No, so all these modifications would not essentially, parking on Cambridge and Mcallister would stay as they are today. I know there's already some pretty significant restrictions on Cambridge specifically, and Mcallister less so, but those would essentially be be as they are today. And even on Grand itself, as I mentioned, there might be small, very minuscule impacts here or there, depending on what designs for the intersections are. But those impacts will be very minimal. And even on areas where you don't, especially in areas where you don't have a bus stop existing, or we wouldn't have to potentially move a bus stop a little bit, you wouldn't see any impacts at all in parking on Grand. Legally, cars aren't supposed to park within 20 feet of the intersection. Now, in practice, do they? Sometimes, obviously, many cars, people squeeze in that little spot there, but legally they're not legally parked, and so we already legally we can't park within 20 feet of the intersection. So these bump outs really won't change any legal parking, and in fact, they'll also potentially improve sight lines. And I've had a lot of people comment on, having issues getting off of Mcallister Street, crossing Grand, or taking a left or right onto Grand from Mcallister Street, or crossing as a pedestrian, and just really not being able to see traffic, or traffic being able to see it as it comes, because of those cars are crowding so close to the intersection. So this will really, having these extensions will really hopefully alleviate some of that issues. Just getting across the street will hopefully be easier if cars aren't always parked right up to the corner. But to answer your original question, no, Cambridge Street and Mcallister Street will not see any changes.
Great. Hugo.
Hi, this is Hugo. I'd like to second, I think, what Joe just said about the Cambridge intersection. I'm also the chair of the Transportation Committee, the Mcallister Grover Transportation Committee, and I've had quite a few parents of the middle school complain about the current situation. They find it unsafe for their children to cross. So this is a concern to quite a few parents that I know in that way. But Joe, the question I had is maybe a little bit more detailed with respect to the plans you presented today, but it has to do with the parking in front of the businesses on Grand. And I think currently the parking is just like you take the parking spot and you can park there for, I don't know what the time limit is, maybe a couple hours or maybe unlimited. I'm not quite sure. But it seems like when you look at the current use of the parking, there's a need for people to park there for a short time and pick up a meal and drop it off. So, if it is 5-minute parking, that should be plenty. So I was wondering whether you are also planning to kind of designate the parking on Grand in front of the businesses and mark them maybe for different usage, like scooters, e-scooters, other e-vehicles that people will likely be using in the next 10 years, as well as services that come and pick up a meal and then drop it off at a house. So kind of 21st century parking needs. Will they be covered? Thanks.
Great question, Hugo. Thanks for listening to me again. We were just you listened to me for about an hour and a half a couple days ago, so thanks for coming back. But great question. And so I will say specifically in those areas where you've got quite a bit of parking usage today. So I believe there's 2-hour parking through most of the corridor. I had another slide from another area, but it is an engagement report that shows exactly where those restrictions are. But I believe it's 2-hour parking, especially in front of on that block between Mcallister and Cambridge. So maybe longer than what a lot of people would use it for. Specifically on signage on parking and who can or won't be able to park there. I think that's a question that as we continue to move forward, we can explore that more. I do think I think this kind of idea here today is just showing the space that will be there. There will be parking spaces still there. They'll be a little narrower than they are today, but they'll still be there. What that kind of looks like, I think, is still an open question. I think that's definitely part of our business engagement is kind of speaking to businesses, asking them, what they think is the best use of parking, specifically to certain areas. But on that point of thinking creatively about where things can go, specifically in areas here. So I want to show this Mcallister area here. So today in Mcallister, there used to be old bus stops, pullouts that existed on campus on both ends. So also in the west end. Kind of looking through when I did the pedestrian study and I was watching kids cross the street every day and people across the street and stuff. One thing I did notice is there's quite a few rideshare pickup and drop offs, quite a few people getting food dropped off from, wherever, whatever, the new pandemic kind of stuff, right? You got people get a lot of deliveries, a lot of pickup and drop offs going on. And I did notice some kind of ad hocly parking on Mcallister sometimes, or parking, just not really knowing where to go. And they're just kind of going wherever they can. So I do think one of those things we can do through this project is really designate these spaces that exist today and kind of make them specifically for pickup, drop off, Uber, Lyft, Bite Squad, those kind of different quick in and outs that a lot of students at the dorms utilize. So I think, today it's not really clear what that space is for. And I think that through this process, we could maybe make that clearer that that is the place we want certain things to happen, especially on campus here. And then on the other side, Mcallister, speaking of talking to Mcallister College, they need space here to use the church and, for other events like that there too. So that's kind of the southern space here will be designated for their use for, wedding events, funerals, whatever goes in the church there. So, I think we are trying to start to think about, other ideas of maybe what we can do with some of this area here. However, as we move forward with the other areas that you're specifically talking about, those questions I think will come up as we talk more specific to the businesses and what they kind of need and want as for their business. But I do think that's a good idea, and that's certainly something we could think about, and especially now that we will be looking at additional space too in the non-automotive space, right? So we're adding about 4 feet on each side. Scooter parking. As we look forward to potentially bike share, getting back into the city, with potentially bike share areas too, like that. So I think there's a lot of potentially unique areas things we can do over here to help improve the built environment for the businesses and for residents and for users. Does that get close to where you're thinking?
Yeah, no, thanks.
Great. We have a question from Kate.
There, I'm unmuted. Scott brought up something about the medians, and I just wanted to comment. I've got a couple of views on those medians. One is, I think it's a snowplow nightmare, the medians. All you do is look at Lexington on that one. And also, oftentimes they'll put plants and that kind of thing. But again, look at Lexington from Summit North. It's never taken care of and also looks awful. But one of the things, Joe, about the trucks that stop in the turn lanes, apparently that's become acceptable practice. I don't know. What I see though happening is just scary, because so many times people from, let's say the truck is stopped there and it's a FedEx truck or a UPS, it's a big truck. And then you have people jaywalking from, and you're not going to stop this, but from like French Meadow or in that area to cross, and you're going by them. You have no idea that there's a pedestrian behind a truck that's crossing from south to north. It is very scary and just an accident waiting to happen. So I don't know if there's something that can be changed about those delivery trucks, but it's just something I've witnessed. And I think it's pretty scary whether you're the pedestrian or especially if you're the driver.
Okay, that's a great point. So I would, for the city's perspective, I don't, I'm not in like operations and that kind of enforcement. I don't believe that it's illegal to do that, to unload and load in the center of the road. But I do certainly hear your concern about the safety issues of having a large kind of blind spot in the middle of the block where people could be walking. The delivery man could be coming out from the back of the truck, or there's a lot of possibilities that you mentioned that are potential safety hazards, and we are cognizant of that. As we kind of work forward with businesses, I think, I've talked to some businesses about their opinion on unloading or not loading in the street like that. Some are against it. Some, maybe require it because they don't have any room anywhere else to load and unload. And so I think it's kind of a sticky issue in the fact that, if a business doesn't have anywhere else to unload or load, then, they kind of don't really have much of a choice. But again, I think that kind of also connects to Hugo's point about, what is the kind of the curbside space look like? Do we have a certain space that's, reserved for delivery trucks, especially smaller ones like UPS or FedEx trucks, where they don't have to do that in the middle of the street and cause safety issues and issues for drivers and for pedestrians and for themselves. And so, I think as we move forward, we've got a lot of discussion and questions to kind of noodle on a little bit here. But I do appreciate that view and just the idea of, if we're looking to make a safer corridor, or big trucks in the middle of the street, bringing large amounts of goods, is that a safer outcome than not? So I do appreciate that comment, and I tell you, we will certainly look at that a lot closer as we keep moving forward.
Great, we have another question, and I apologize, I didn't write your name down, Healing Insight.
It's okay, it's Senya. So, I actually have a further comment on the medians, and I appreciate that there isn't intention to put a median on that stretch from Cambridge to Mcallister streets, because there are so many deliveries that are done by UPS and FedEx along that stretch. That is one of my main concerns about putting medians, however, west of that area, because that could potentially cause some traffic buildup, or traffic backup if, I mean, really, ordering from Amazon and having the UPS delivery guy there is just a fact of life since the pandemic. And so I feel like it needs to be accommodated for in those residential areas as well, to have room for people to be parked along that street, but for a truck to be able to pull up and park, run up to a door, come back, and then move their vehicle. If there are medians there, it's will it be possible for cars to go around that truck? Because I don't think you're going to get rid of the trucks. That's not going to happen. But we want to make sure that the traffic can flow. And just based on what you're saying about the width of the medians and the roads, it doesn't really sound like there would be room for that along with traffic. Is that true?
Yeah, Sonia, I'd say that yeah, if a truck would be, say potentially double parked, I've seen Amazon trucks do all manner of parking all over the place. So I think the hypothetical situation, which is probably a real situation, where a truck just pulls up and quickly tries to drop some off, and they'd stop in the street, or they double park, or they don't get over all the way and they don't leave enough room to get around them. I think with the medians, you potentially could have an issue where you would have you wouldn't have an alternative to get around them like you would without the median, right? So if you have the asphalt there, you can always go around if something's there. So that's a very good point. I would say with the potential hardscape median, which would essentially just be a concrete curb, that could potentially be worked out to put areas where trucks could use that space for unloading and unloading. It would have to be signed very well. But that could be hypothetically. Obviously, the landscape option, you wouldn't have that option. It would be landscaped. And so, if we did do the median options or one of them, I think that would be something that we'd have to work out through that process and just figure out how that could work. Again, maybe designating certain areas where trucks are encouraged to stop rather than kind of stopping wherever. But again, that is something that I think we'll figure out if we do choose the median option. I think kind of what I'm hearing tonight is not a whole lot of support for the median option. So maybe we likely won't see them in the final result. But I think I think the idea of having the options out here again, we're just to kind of get that feedback, that kind of that resident kind of opinion idea about what's going on out there, and letting us know that, hey, maybe these medians wouldn't be a good idea. Maybe they don't work other places. Maybe we shouldn't do it here. So I appreciate that comment. And again, if we do go that way, we would certainly do all we can to mitigate that. But that's, again, it's a if we do. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think it works well in front of Mcallister because there aren't deliveries
Right.
being dropped off there, right? Like they have loading zones and they have areas where trucks can pull into, but on those residential areas, there's really not room for that. They're typically not driving down the alleyway and parking. They are going to be coming up the middle of Grand Avenue and then parking in the street. So I think it's a little different situation than what we have in that stretch in front of the college.
Agreed. Thank you for that. Yeah.
All right, so I don't see any more hands raised or any more questions in the chat, but we'll give people another minute. I also just dropped into the chat the project website, Joe's contact information, so that's there as well. And feel free, if you didn't know your hand, how to raise a hand, you could unmute too if you have a question. I have no other questions.
All right. Well, I'm going to stop sharing my screen then real quick. And so, we're almost at 7. So, I think that was a pretty good conversation. I appreciate all the comments and everyone who came out and, wanted to engage and give me some feedback. I think it was really important hearing from you and all your views and everything on kind of how everything works and what you think about what you saw today. And so again, it's vital that we kind of get this information. I appreciate everyone who gave me that's information. It was really good and great. And again, if you haven't left any feedback on our website, we have a survey open that essentially lets you kind of give us an idea of what you prefer through Grand Avenue. And take that survey and let us know, and we'll gather all that data, and we will in a couple months we'll come back and we'll have a preferred alternative that kind of takes in all your feedback, and then we'll be moving forward then with that. And so with that, again, I appreciate everyone spending some time with me tonight and listening to me go on for a while. So you're all free to go. Have a good night.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This was really informative.
You.
Thanks, Joe.